The New York Declaration calls for a Palestinian state, but a completely demilitarized Palestinian state. So the only country in the world that is completely demilitarized would be this Palestinian state they're talking
Which is very odd. I mean, the timing of this language comes in the midst of a genocide. I mean, if anybody needs protection anywhere in the world, it should be the Palestinians. What happened in New York and all of this was not two separate tracks of Trump and Netanyahu doing his thing, France and the Saudis and the Arabs doing their own thing. But it seems that the actual pressure here is coming from the political and the diplomatic front. Do you think that pressure is really enough for the resistance, regardless, Hamas, socialists, all others, to come and say, yeah, we give up because the Qataris and the Turks are saying you should? Welcome to the FloodGate podcast, brought to you by the Palestine Chronicle. I'm your host, Ramzy Baroud. If you are new to this channel, please do not forget to subscribe, share, and interact with our content so that more people can benefit from these vital discussions with important guests, analysts, and newsmakers. I am joined by journalist and investigative reporter Robert Inlakesh. Robert is one of the most important and also well-known analysts on the Middle East and a regular contributor to the Palestine Chronicle. Robert, thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me. And it seems like your introductions to me get kinder each time.
Oh, that's very sweet. I want just to kind of try to situate the subject here with the latest development from Washington. Starting on September 29th, US President Donald Trump announces in a joint press conference with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu a 20-point plan with the alleged goal of reaching a ceasefire in Gaza, to the point that many are referring to it as the Trump peace plan, right? So the proposal reads like a surrender agreement, not so different from previous attempts at forcing or coercing the Palestinians to end the resistance to Israel and to the Israeli genocide and to submit to Israel's objectives in exchange for food and medicine. And of course, the proposal comes with the same old threats. Basically, if you don't accept, all hell is going to break loose, and similar language. So let's start with this, Robert. If the proposal is clearly unfair, and it is, how do you explain the enthusiasm by some Arab and Muslim countries, but also by some, surprisingly, by some European and other countries that are known for being, relatively speaking, of course, supportive of the Palestinian cause? For example, why is Spain keen on Trump's ultimatum despite everything it has done to expose Israel? And this is kind of giving the impression that this time is different. This time Trump is serious, and there is an element of fairness in this proposal, judging by the responses that happened internationally. How do you explain this?
Well, I think this is part of a larger insidious plot that has been taking place. And obviously it was formed and they were plotting for this before September. And this is part of this whole recognition of Palestine by a number of Western nations. It is very much connected to this. I see the Trump-Netanyahu statement as somewhat of almost a counter proposal, but still staying along the lines of this. And so I think it's important to perhaps start with what's known as the New York Declaration, which was adopted at the United Nations General Assembly unanimously. A lot of people praised this, but they didn't read the document. And something that I pointed out and many others have pointed out is that these declarations of a two-state solution as the solution to the conflict has been voted on for the past 3 decades by the United Nations General Assembly pretty much every single year. So this is not something unique that the United Nations General Assembly would vote through something like this. It's always Israel, United States, and Micronesia and some other smaller states that are opposed to it. The rest of the world is either abstains in the case of some European countries, or they vote in favor of it. So this New York Declaration is actually something new. And I would say in a way, it's somewhat comparable to Trump's 2020 deal of the century. Because if you read the actual document itself, which is not in any way detailed, just like Trump's proposal wasn't detailed, The New York Declaration calls for a Palestinian state, but a completely demilitarized Palestinian state. So the only country in the world that is completely demilitarized would be this Palestinian state they're talking
Which is very odd. I mean, the timing of this language comes in the midst of a genocide. I mean, if anybody needs protection anywhere in the world, it should be the Palestinians. But while they are being exterminated, annihilated by Israel, we are telling them, oh, by the way, you also have no right to defend yourself in any meaningful way, even in the future.
And this is written in the New York Declaration. They say that non-state actors should be discouraged and not play a role in Palestinian politics. But what do they mean by non-state actors? Basically, what's happened is all these states have recognized the state of Palestine, which is the Palestinian Authority, which rules the PLO. It used to be the other way around, but they've changed that now. So they recognize the Palestinian Authority, which is led by the mainstream branch of Fatah, and every single other Palestinian political party is designated as a terrorist group in basically every single one of these Western countries. So that includes the PFLP, the DFLP, different branches of Fatah, which they don't like as well in some cases, obviously Hamas, Islamic Jihad, and all of the others. So what they're saying is, in this Palestinian state, there can be no democracy. It has to be ruled by the Palestinian Authority, but the specific people that the West chooses. Then they talk about the reforms of this Palestinian Authority, which will rule over this state. Again, by the way, they don't actually touch on what these final status issues, which was, the whole thing about the Oslo process was that they couldn't find an answer to the final status issues. Those final status issues, there's no solution to them. There's no timeline for when Israel has to recognize the Palestinian state, but they're talking about reforms of the Palestinian Authority.
By the way, Robert, just about the final status. I mean, this is actually worse than Oslo, which was horrible to begin with. But at least Oslo has envisaged some sort of a timeline where these final status issues were supposed to actually be concluded sometime in 1999. Between 1993 to 99, and that was and even then Palestinians were not happy with it because it kind of prolonged the discussion on the vital subjects, allowing Israel to build yet more settlements, etc. And when that deadline came and went, nothing happened. To the contrary, there was a new status quo, which is now you have a Palestinian Authority that is doing the governance on behalf of Israel, subjugating the Palestinians on behalf of Israel, and serving as a line of defense for Israel. And that was terrible to begin with. Now, this new Oslo, if you will, does not even offer any timelines, any structure of any kind.
Nothing at all.
Then there's the enthusiasm. So what you are saying is this enthusiasm is actually part of something that's been going on for a while. What happened in New York and all of this was not two separate tracks of Trump and Netanyahu doing his thing, France and the Saudis and the Arabs doing their own thing.
Exactly. And this New York Declaration was put together by Saudi Arabia and France. And in Macron's speech, talking about, he didn't explicitly, I don't think he said the New York Declaration, but that's what he was referring to, everything he was talking about. So they were talking about disarming Hamas. They were talking about an international force going in to Gaza with coordination from the Israelis, only if the Israelis coordinate. And their whole focus was disarmament. And in the New York Declaration, it says that all of the Israeli captives have to be immediately handed over by Hamas. So the New York Declaration and what it's proposing essentially would be something, even the reforms, like you noted, of the Palestinian Authority, the Oslo process, the Israelis were supposed to withdraw from that 60% of the West Bank, which they have full occupation. They have a full occupation in, known as Area C, within that 5-year time frame, and they didn't respect it. And Oslo was way more detailed. There was way more that went into Oslo. And of course, after that, in the first Intifada, these sort of these American requests and European requests for PA reforms came in. But what were the reforms? The reforms were to do with the security forces to make them a better collaborator force with the Israelis. And that's what
you're referring to General Dayton here and the new Palestinian doctrine that he established, which like let's indoctrinate and brainwash a generation of Palestinians, Palestinian youth who are desperate for money, for income, to help their families, and let's make sure that unlike what happened during the Second Intifada, they never turn their weapons against Israel, but rather use that weapons to suppress the Palestinians. So that was the new Palestinian. But I don't want to divert too much from our original subject.
Yep.
The Palestinian Authority has been subservient to Israel from the very start, but it's getting worse and worse to the point that it really feels as if the PA has been hired as a branch within the IDF at this point. There's really no argument around it. And I know that there are lots of Palestinian analysts who are based in the West Bank or have to go back and forth to the West Bank. Sometimes they know these things, but they are beating around the bushes of, calling on the PA to, push for national unity. The PA sold out a long time ago, and there can be no way of reviving the PA or making a national project out of it. But the PA has always been so territorial when it comes to certain things. For example, the relationship between Gaza and the West Bank. Yeah, go and do whatever you need to do in Gaza, but at the end of the day, we should be the governors of Gaza. Or, build settlements and whatever, but do not annex certain parts of the West Bank. They are very territorial about the things that matters to them, because without these elements, there's no reason for them to exist in the first place. But this time around, they were also excited about the Trump proposal, which actually is completely marginalizing the PA. How do you explain that?
Well, I think the PA are surviving by the thread of a tooth at this point. They are, a lot of people don't know this, you know this well, they survive on the tax revenue coming through. The Israelis have to release it to them, and they can choose when to withhold that to financially strain them. The way that since October 7, the occupation has even more deeply entrenched itself in the West Bank. They've gone through to businesses, they've ransacked banks, buildings where people get loans, all of this sort. And this has put a huge strain on what we could call a quasi-economy of the West Bank. So a lot of strain has been put on, and of course by the Europeans and the Americans as well, because the Palestinian Authority is dependent upon the EU and the US to survive for funds. And so what we saw, for instance, you noted that historically they've always been adamant on they need that 22% of historic Palestine to have their state, including Gaza and the West Bank. And now they just seem to be throwing it away. And it's interesting because the 2020 Trump proposal, Palestinian Authority was completely against it. When I went to the West Bank in 2020 to film a documentary about it, I interviewed so many people from the Palestinian Authority, and all of them were so against this proposal, and they gave me all the reasons. But now the Palestinian Authority comes through with the Trump plan, not the New York Declaration, by the way. The Trump plan, the New York Declaration was what we were talking about. They're talking about, for instance, focusing on the reforms of the Palestinian education even now. They want to get to what the textbooks say and have that controlled by the West. But the Palestinian Authority now is in such a weak position, and the other Arab and Muslim majority countries have also got in on this. What the Trump proposal is the New York Declaration, in essence, without a Palestinian state in the future. They're just saying, well, we want to rid Hamas of its weapons. We want, within a 72-hour period, according to the White House, Hamas has to give up all the captives. So that's its bargaining chips gone immediately, and it needs to declare surrender. So it's surrendered, and it's given up the captives. And then after that, they say 250 life prisoners will be given back, right? They will be freed by the Israelis, and 1,700 Palestinians from Gaza who were taken after October 7. So these are people not in military jails, by the way. They're in concentration camps like Satiman, where they're being tortured, they're being subjected to gang rape, sexual assault around the corner, around the clock. They're having their limbs amputated, these people. But then Hamas just has to depend upon Israel's goodwill to allow all of these prisoners to be released, and then Israel to withdraw in a phased fashion. But we saw back in March that Israel they decided they didn't want the ceasefire, which they agreed to in January, and they just started bombing Gaza again. And they didn't care. They got a bunch of captives out, and they said, we don't want to end the war. We're going to go in. And now this Operation Gideon Chariots 2 is aiming, they say, although it's not been successful, and they don't even have the troop numbers to be able to occupy Gaza City. So now this is essentially a trick, and it's a very complex and layered trick, and it is very much related to this New York Declaration because the correlation is there, the international force. The difference is perhaps that Trump wants Tony Blair to be the head of this, the war criminal Tony Blair. They want to remove Hamas and the Palestinian Authority from having any role, at least immediately, in the Gaza Strip in the civil administration, which, Ramzy, is impossible to do, to remove people and say and put people in positions in the civil administration throughout the Gaza Strip, managing such a complex situation as we have in Gaza now, with all of the rubble, the health hazards, everything, with people who have no relationship whatsoever to either the previous Palestinian Authority administration or to Hamas in some way, and the Hamas.
And that's because really the intention is not that. The intention is not building Gaza. I mean, they are thinking about it from this point of view. Every time, that, Robert, every time a Palestinian is allowed to leave as a wounded Palestinian, is being sent to Egypt, to the Emirates, to Turkey, to Italy, wherever, generally speaking, they usually allow for one, sometimes two members of the family to go with that person. Now, if you just do the math, how many wounded Palestinians is there in Gaza right now? Hundreds of thousands. Okay, if each one of them is going to have one single family member going with them outside, here you have half of Gaza is gone, right there. So that's the idea. The idea here is to try to create some sort of, a different way of ethnically cleansing people by saying, hey, these are wounded people, they have to leave. Family members are they going to be allowed to come back? We really don't know. Most likely they won't. So that's one thing. Then, who else wants to leave Gaza? Who else? Indonesia, there's some news. I was listening to Dr. Mustafa Barouti, talking about Indonesia willing to accept 200,000. That's Indonesia alone. They're talking about Sudan, Somaliland, and others. I'm sure that some European countries are going to come and say we are ready to receive 5,000, 10,000. So it's a different way. I don't think this is really about rebuilding. I think this is just gaining access to Gaza and then slowly and carefully allowing certain, chunks of the population to leave Gaza. And at the end of the day, well, it's going to become a lot easier for Israel to conquer Gaza, because ultimately the real obstacle in Israel's face is not the resistance, is the people of Gaza who keep feeding the resistance with more fighters. Get rid of the people, you're going to make it very, very difficult for the resistance. But there's something that I still find a little bit surprising, Robert, and that's just a psychological component of this particular proposal, or the political context around it, is that in the past, they tried so many times to sell nonsensical proposals to push Palestinians to surrender. And the resistance said, no, it's not even a starting point for a conversation. The demands are very clear, 1, 2, 3, 4. Why this time it feels that it's different? I know you spoke about a complex operation here involving, those who's like, we will recognize Palestine symbolically, but we will give you Trump, the chance to do whatever the heck you're doing, and we are going to declare immediately our support for your proposal. So there was some kind of but why are Palestinians beholden to it? Why does it feel, and a lot of people are warning Hamas not to accept, as if there is some indications that they might, even though you are talking about total surrender and defeat? Is the resistance in a weaker position? What changed from the last time?
I think it's all of the Arab countries, particularly, Turkey, Egypt, and Qatar are all on board with it. So that they can apply pressure to Hamas and the Hamas leadership. They do have the ability to apply pressure to them. And evidently, all of these regimes, they want for the war to end. They want it to end for a number of reasons. It's not good for them and the stability of their own countries, their own regimes. It's not good for their economic ties in the region, because people start pointing out, why is Turkey doing these deals? Why is Qatar allowing the airbase to be used by the United States to airlift military equipment over to bomb Gaza? Why is Egypt still not forcing aid to come into Gaza? These are all questions which are constantly coming up, and they're applying a lot of pressure. And honestly, they just want it to end. And they don't care about the resistance. They don't care about what the future of Palestine looks like. That's just the reality, or else they wouldn't have accepted this. They wouldn't have came out and advertised it, and they wouldn't have been okay, including the Palestinian Authority. They wouldn't have been okay with saying, yeah, we'll accept this like idea of a state, which Israel won't even agree to recognizing it, but maybe the rest of the world will get around to recognizing it, where it's a bunch of these isolated Bantustans, which are completely unarmed. By the way, after World War II, Nazi Germany, after the regime was overthrown, they allowed them eventually to have their weapons back, to militarize again. Obviously, they limited them. And the government in West Germany, which was allied with the West during the against the Soviets during the Cold War, was comprised of many former Nazis. So you're literally treating the Palestinians, and not just Hamas, but you're treating the Palestinian Authority, which is supposed to be an ally for all of these countries, right? And they're recognizing it. You're treating them worse than the Nazis. You're treating Palestinians in a way where you're suppressing them and their rights to the point where the Nazis and that regime and the people in Germany weren't suppressed to that level. And then you're branding it as a state and saying that you're recognizing it. And you want to control their textbooks. You want to control what goes in and out. You want to have less than 22%. They're not allowed to have water resources of their own. Nothing. And Israel, there's not even a promise that Israel will even recognize this. And that's how we get into the conversation of the Greater Israel Project. And a lot of people misunderstand what the Greater Israel is. The Greater Israel is not necessarily that Israel wants to seize every small little piece of territory within this massive range of countries in the region, which includes part of Turkey, Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, Saudi, Egypt, etc. It's not just that they want to, expand into those countries, where, of course, they do want to take territory in these areas like they're doing in southern Lebanon and in Syria. They continue in the occupied West Bank. But it's that they want these divided Arab regimes, sectarian regimes, ethno-states in the region to be under their de facto control with security agreements with them. Mm-hmm. And in the case of the Palestinian Authority and in occupied Palestine, they'll make a slight exception for this, perhaps in the West Bank, where they'll allow some civil administration perhaps to run. And then eventually, maybe they'll just pressure the people to leave. Because in Gaza, like you said, the clear goal from the beginning has been to expel the entirety of the population and to disarm them. And realistically, the weapons of the resistance is the only thing stopping the Israelis from doing this.
I mean, it's so simple. I mean, to think about the weapons of the resistance. This is not about us advocating and we are looking at this from purely analytical point of view. In order for you to understand the effectiveness of certain, like, for example, of the weapons of the resistance, all you need to do is just imagine this scenario without the resistance. Palestinians did not resist. Israel walks in 20 days after October 7 into the ground operation, and let's assume that Palestinians did not fire a bullet, did not fight back in any possible way. What conversation would we be having right now, 2 years later? What conversation? Aside from the fact that, Israel is arresting and beating and killing and raping, and that's it. The reason that we are actually having this conversation and the reason that Trump is giving yet more ultimatums is the fact that the Palestinians are continuing to resist. And I want to come back to this issue that of whether Trump this time around is going to get what he wants. I don't think he will, but let's just assume that let's get back to this issue in a second here. But there's also this idea that the Middle East as a region, from a geopolitical point of view, is already sorted out in favor of Israel. They are talking the Julani, Shara, whatever you want to call him, for normalization or at least a security agreement. The Qataris, and this is, by the way, how you know that Qatar was involved in the Trump proposal? Very simple. The fact that there was a point there that Israel will not, Netanyahu called and apologized to the emir. Because if Qatar was not involved, why would the Americans add that caveat anyway? Why the apology? So the Qataris knew about it and they agreed to it in advance, right? And yet they are also hosting Hamas. The whole thing is confusing for a lot of people, but clearly there is, I don't want to call it a conspiracy because it's really obvious what's happening. But there's this assumption that Hezbollah is out. Iran is more or less neutralized and they are just waiting for the next round of beating. But this is a little bit too quick to make these assumptions. How do you assess the geopolitics of the Middle East? Is Israel really winning this, or we are still at the very, very kind of first chapter of this conflict?
I do think it is still in the first chapter. I think we'll have many chapters to come. I don't see this as being a done deal unless the Israelis do something extremely reckless with Iran and the whole region blows up, in which case we might have a dramatic end to everything. But looking at this realistically, the Israelis haven't won on any front. Now, they have secured certain tactical victories. They did evidently weaken Hezbollah in Lebanon with the assassination of Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah, but not just the Secretary General of Hezbollah, but also, the first line of leadership, whether that be in the Radwan forces, the head of the entire military, or many of the political leaders as well of Hezbollah. And then the pager attack was a major issue for them in their communications. And they did take out some weapons. But Hezbollah, until the very, very last day, was firing missiles into Tel Aviv and bringing down buildings, or at least parts of buildings. It was using like 40 drones at a time to attack an Israeli military unit in the south of Lebanon. Despite all of its issues, it was able to hold places like Khiyam and other villages in the south and fight massive battles and sacrifice a lot of people to do it. There was an abundance of weapons, and that's very clear. Hezbollah still has weapons. I think anyone that's trying to claim that, they're trying to inflict a political, a diplomatic blow against Lebanon, and of course to demonize and make Hezbollah seem very weak. Hezbollah can still fight. It's a lot more capable than Hamas was, for instance, on October 7th. Way more capable. The question of when it enters now is a different question. Hezbollah adopted a strategy since the very start of pressure. And that's because, honestly, this is my interpretation, Hezbollah and Iran and the rest of them in this axis of resistance, as it's called, interpreted what happened on October 7 as something that would lead to a war, a brief war, which then they could close and then they could, strategize after that, and it would last a lot longer. I don't think they properly grasped Israel had this change of mind on October 7 about its entire strategy and decided to just go nuclear on everything. Obviously, I'm not speaking literally nuclear. However, I wouldn't put it past them. And they said that we're just going to completely destroy every single enemy in the entire region. And I don't think this sunk in properly for Iran and Hezbollah. This is my personal reading of it. And the way that I've tracked it.
But up to a certain point, Robert. It didn't sink in up to a certain point.
Until Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah was assassinated, in my opinion. That's when it started to sink in for them, that this was a different kind of war and approach that they would have to take. And then Israel made miscalculations, because if you look at the attack, people say Iran is out of it. It's far from it. Iran, they believed in the Israeli media when they launched their attack in June against Iran and assassinated over a dozen Iranian generals. They believed that they were talking about, we achieved in 6 minutes what it took 6 days to achieve against Hezbollah, they were saying, because they believed that if they took out these generals, what would happen politically to Iran would happen. It would be the same as what happened to Hezbollah, which is not the same. A political party and a militant group in Lebanon is not the same as a government with a paramilitary force of over 1 million people that can get even 1 million more. The IRGC, the Iranian military, the whole state, all of its apparatus, it's huge.
But of course, Robert, they were counting on the destabilization of Iran. I mean, their assessment is that Iran's actual vulnerability comes from Iranian society. It's fragmented, it's segmented, it hates one another. You have all of these classes, all of these people with different political agendas, liberals, conservatives, and so forth and so on. So they thought, you unleash all these spies into the country, doing damage everywhere, blowing up police stations, killing generals, doing all these things. Israel and the US deals with the nuclear component, and Israel deals with the military elements, but also government building, just to create a political vacuum and total chaos. And of course, considering how vulnerable the social and political fabric of Iran was before the war. They thought that the rest is going to be handled by the Iranians. And that's where the bad intelligence comes in. To the contrary, Iran emerged even more stronger. And I think the reason that they emerged stronger is that they have been looking at Iraq. They have been looking at Syria. You know exactly what your fate is going to look like. Iranians, if you allow them to do exactly as the neoconservatives done in Iraq, as the Israelis and the Americans and their allies in the region have done to Syria, you're going to be on your knees for a very, very long time. So whether you are a liberal or a conservative, it doesn't really matter. Your country is going to go down the drain. And thus, they had enough political savvy that surprised everybody, honestly, because even us here in the West, we are subjected to a lot of American propaganda. And we really thought, we don't know what's going to happen in Iran. Anything, the society could collapse, but it didn't. And also that gave Iran the chance to discover all the fault lines in its own society, the spies and the networks and all of that. So they are talking about a new war on Iran. But to achieve what at this point? I mean, what is it that they can do now that Iran must have looked into every facet of the previous war that they haven't done already?
Well, they have a limited amount of time to be able to launch this war, in my opinion, because Iran is mass producing ballistic missiles and other kinds of weapons to the point where it might be too strong, or it might be considered too strong for the Israelis and the Americans to even try in a few months' time. That's at least what I'm hearing. The interesting thing is, this is the big $1 million question. What do they hope to achieve? All I can think of is that the Americans get in pretty soon after the Israelis, or they do it together, and they go after the infrastructure of Iran, and then hope that over time, after this infrastructure has been so damaged, the oil industry, agriculture, every water, that they will go after all of this, and it will cripple the Iranian economy so badly, along with the sanctions, that it will create this perfect storm that may lead to something like we saw with the fall of the Syrian government. Because Syria, the government of Bashar al-Assad, had managed to basically win the war by 2018, but then it stopped completely. And the Caesar Act sanctions came on, and that exposed all of the corruption in the Syrian regime. All of the corruption came to a head. And, generals and people in positions of political power and in positions of economic power in the country can be bought up at that point. And that's what happened. That's why Syria fell. Everyone was bought up, and no one wanted to fight for that Syria anymore, because there was just nothing there that anyone saw that they could fight for anymore. The problem that the Israelis and the US have is that they don't understand Iran on a cultural level. They're talking to these people in the Persian diaspora, right? And a lot of these people hold, let's say, quite irrational views on politics, and they don't represent as well necessarily what the majority of the Iranian public will react, or even themselves will react in certain times, depending upon what's happening. And so I was speaking before the war happened. We all knew what was about to happen. Everyone was writing about it. We saw it coming. And I spoke to an Iranian contact of mine, and he said, listen, don't worry. They don't understand Iranians at all. And I said, why would Iran not preempt this and attack first, for instance? That was my big question. And this contact told me, no, it's better if Israel attacks us first, because if the Iranian people are able to see that their country was attacked, Israel's the one that initiated it, their government, even if they hate them, their government was negotiating. They were going in good faith. But then the Israelis attacked and killed our people, they'll stand with their government. And he was completely correct. I didn't know what to make of it when it was happening. And I remember calling him back when the attack first happened. And he said, wait, give it, I think he said, give it 15 to 20 hours. And within that time frame is when Iran hit Israel back. So I think they have a lapse in judgment. And if they believe that a country like Iran, with the military power that it possesses, is just going to lay down and die, and that Hezbollah, a group which is talking about waging a battle, a Karbala battle, that they want to fight the battle that the grandson of the Prophet fought to the death in Karbala if they are attacked, if these people are just going to lay down, they've got another thing coming.
Absolutely.
I think they want to attack both because they want to weaken both, and they definitely have a strategy. Will they have some successes? I guarantee they will. But there's great successes come with, like, for instance, you said, those collaborators inside, the agents inside, who are Iranians themselves, inside of Iran, and collaborators in Lebanon as well, which led to things like the pager attack as well, giving away the locations of certain key people for the Israelis to assassinate, and then launching these assassinations. So that doesn't remove the Iranian government. That can't achieve regime change alone. And even a massive bombing campaign from the US is going to end up drawing the US into a massive, catastrophic war where these Gulf countries that think that they're securing something now with all these agreements with the United States, Qatar will be, like we saw in the first round, will be the front line. Not because the Iranians necessarily have any problem with Qatar as a country. In 2017, when there was a blockade imposed by the other Gulf countries on Qatar, the Iranians
in fact, I was in Qatar at that moment, Robert, and there was fear that there would be an actual invasion coming from Qatar's Gulf enemies. The Turks sent 5,000 soldiers, if I remember correctly, just to secure the palaces and all of that. And it was the Iranian economy that came to the rescue, and to aid Qatar and help them survive this until they managed to stand on their feet again. And once again, they were incorporated into the mosaic of the other Gulf economies. But what essentially you're saying here, and I fully agree, that this diplomatic coup, this plot of let's all kind of give still the impression to the solidarity, global solidarity with the Palestinians, that things are changing, you're getting some of your demands, Palestine is being recognized, but the Palestinians need to make a few compromises, and that's the Trump proposal, ultimatum, that everybody seems to be excited about. So if Hamas comes and says no, then it means that it's the Palestinians' fault, and they have brought this to themselves. And the genocide cannot be blamed on Israel anymore, obviously, because it's the Palestinians who are being on the rejectionist front. So, in my mind, I don't think the resistance itself is damaged in Gaza. I think they have adapted, and they are able to find ways to fight back and make life extremely difficult for Israel, to the point that Israel cannot actually control Gaza in a meaningful way, as in a military administration. Remember the military administration after 1967? I don't think they will be able to do that. So we can carry on and on until Netanyahu collapses on his own, of course, at a very, very heavy price to be paid by the Palestinians. But it seems that the actual pressure here is coming from the political and the diplomatic front. Do you think that pressure is really enough for the resistance, regardless, Hamas, socialists, all others, to come and say, yeah, we give up because the Qataris and the Turks are saying you should? That doesn't make sense to me from a historical point of view. How do you feel about it?
I don't think it will be enough, although I would say that there is evidently a lot of pressure being applied against Hamas, and there's a lot of indicators of that sort of pressure that is being applied through sort of this, let's say, the more Muslim Brotherhood aligned part of Hamas. So like Hamas, as you know, is not uniform in the views of its leadership, because there's a big difference between somebody like Khalid Mashal and Khalil al-Hayya. Their views diverge on many different issues. The big question also will be not just Hamas and what the Hamas political leadership says and what considerations they have and different views that are being discussed now. I think most likely they'll come back and they'll say, we accept it on the condition that XYZ is changed. And then the Israelis will say, no, we don't agree with it, and blame them. That's, I think, most likely circumstance. But the other groups, you're very right, will the PFLP, Islamic Jihad, and all the other groups in Gaza go, yeah, okay, fine, we'll lay down our weapons. No, Islamic Jihad, especially the statements that I've seen come from them, and I believe the PFLP and the others, I haven't read through their statements, as many of their statements. But Islamic Jihad, what I've heard from them is that no way, not even a chance that we're accepting this.
And also they know, I mean, it happened, for crying out loud, it happened in Sabra and Shatila and so many other places. when Philip Habib came, with another ultimatum, an American ultimatum in 82, and said to the Palestinians, leave Lebanon and don't worry, we will take care of the Palestinians in Lebanon. Within a short period of time, Palestinian women were raped at mass scale. Thousands were killed in Sabra and Shatila. And Israel essentially controlled the country until the resistance, organic resistance rise from Lebanon itself, leading to Hezbollah and pushing the Israelis out in 2000. I mean, it makes no sense, even from this Muslim Brotherhood branch of Hamas, to accept something of that nature, knowing that this means even more massacres, more humiliation, and much greater defeat. And I just want to really I'm glad that you brought this whole idea that Hamas is not this uniform political organization. Yeah, there are different pressure points and there are different camps. Why can't Hamas say, listen, we are under pressure. I mean, we are being targeted and killed in various countries that are supposed to be safe and secure. We give the political decision back to Gaza. We're out of this. And Gazans can decide. The leadership in Gaza of the resistance, what they call the joint operation room, they can make that decision. Why are they still kind of finding themselves stuck in this position, allowing themselves to be pressured by all of these forces?
I think they don't want to lose the connection with all of these different contacts that they have. Like, for instance, the Egyptian regime has betrayed the people of Gaza in a number of ways. But yet Hamas has always kept relations with the intelligence branch there. They've always had good relations. And so even though at different junctures, these different allies of theirs or partners in different affairs have turned their backs on them, they've always tried to keep those allies and to take an approach of somewhat moderation. That doesn't always work. For instance, there were a lot of voices, for instance, when everything happened in Syria, that said, look, let's try and assume a more neutral position. Bashar al-Assad would not accept a neutral position. And the opposition would not accept a neutral position.
And Yarmouk was the perfect example of that. I mean, I've done a lot of reporting and interviews from Yarmouk for my book, The Last Earth. And really, that's indeed what happened. When the Palestinians, the Mukhtars, the representation of the Palestinians in Yarmouk, said to the opposition, please do not hide in the camp. Nope, this is Syrian territories. And, and they brought the Bashar and all of that. And so this chaos, and by the way, the Palestinians ended up being blamed for it anyway, from both sides, which is a tragedy of its own. I think a lot of our listeners and viewers want to hear this from you, particularly knowing that you have been reporting on the resistance for a long time. Do you think that this is the end of resistance in Gaza? What do you think the future holds?
I don't believe it's the end of the resistance in Gaza. And you've just given the example of 1982 in Lebanon. Israel came in, killed 20,000 people. Then when the PLO left, that was, the beginning of the end of the PLO and the end of its resistance, really, at least until later in the West Bank and Gaza. And we saw what happened with Sabra and Shatila and all of the other massacres which occurred, the occupation of South Lebanon. And then we don't even need to look at that and go through all of the history and all of the different examples. And there are so many throughout the history, where giving up your weapons shows that the Israelis or the Zionists just go on the offensive and you lose more and more. Look at what they're doing right now. The new Syrian government is not resisting Israel. The new Syrian government has tried to disarm groups in the south of the country to its greatest ability. Yet Israel still is arming separatist factions in Sweda of the Druze because they want to encourage an independent Druze state in the south of the country, despite the fact that Ahmed al-Shara is coordinating with the Israelis on security issues. He coordinated even the movement of the tanks into Sweda when Israel then went and bombed those tanks. He gave back the belongings of Eli Cohen and the remains of a soldier captured in 1982. Everything you can think of, stopping the weapons to Hezbollah, arresting Palestinian resistance leaders, ensuring there can't be resistance, everything. Resistance stops, full stop, right? Because in the argument of people who support the new Syrian government and they're hardline, Syrian government fans, they'll go, well, he wants to rebuild the country. Israel won't even allow that. Israel is pushing further into Syrian territory. They're seizing people as captives. They're torturing Syrians. They're murdering Syrians. They're blowing up their homes. And they continue to take more and more land and fund separatists. And they want the country to implode because their mission in the region is to destroy everyone. They won't allow you to have a government in Damascus. They won't allow there to be a government in Beirut, which functions properly. They want a civil war. Tom Barak, the head of the U.S. envoy, supposedly to Syria, but now obviously to Lebanon, he's taken over from Ortega's. He comes over and he says openly the other day, he has an interview, we're not arming the Lebanese army so they can fight Israel. He laughs and he says, we're arming them so they can fight their own people. So Israel right now is occupying southern Lebanon, pushing further into southern Lebanon. It openly says it won't pull its troops and bombs them every single day, murders entire civilian families. And then it has these conversations, these friendly conversations with Nawaf Salam, the prime minister, who is the pro-US pick. He's talking about, yeah, we want normalization. We want normalization. You can pander to them all you like. You can give away your weapons. You can disarm all of your resistance organizations. Israel's going to do what Israel wants to do. The resistance is standing in the way.
It's shocking to see how low these ruling classes can go. I mean, fine, be against Hamas, be against Hezbollah, who cares? But have some sort of a priority. Where is the Lebanese nationalism? I mean, you saw Tom Barak coming to Lebanon talking about, the nation state concept doesn't work for Arabs. These are tribal people. The loyalty goes to the tribe before it goes to the state. The guy is serving like he's the Edward Said equivalent now of this kind of neo-colonial push in the Middle East. It's insulting journalists. I mean, if this happens anywhere else in the world, the man would have been put on an airplane and just sent out of the country. But he is acting as if the governor of Lebanon, and the government seems to be okay with that. And there's going to be an urgent meeting by the Lebanese government to discuss, the process of disarming Hezbollah. Is that your priority right now? Is this your priority? I mean, it doesn't make much sense. But the point we want to leave with here is that, and again, I insist on that question because, yes, we know that resistance will not die in Palestine. They've been resisting for the last 100+ years, from Izzuddin al-Qassam's days and before until today. So that's not going to stop. But from a technical point of view, the current resistance, the armed resistance in Gaza, do you see, and very quickly, because we are above the time limit, do you see that resistance actually surrendering in Gaza?
I don't see them surrendering, even if there's certain political statements that were put out. I don't see them surrendering, not for 1 second. And also, you had to understand, well, you understand this, but for the viewers, you have to understand that the resistance in Gaza now, when we talk about Hamas or Jihad or all of these other, they are the people of Gaza at this point. The people that are filling the ranks, that are replenishing the ranks of dead fighters, are the people who've lost their entire family. The people that have been subjected to genocide for 2 years. These people, a lot of them, it's not ideologically about Hamas or Fatah or Jabha or whatever it will be anymore. It's not about that. It's about fighting the enemy. It's about resistance. And they've given up everything in Gaza. Like, they have given up hundreds of members of their family, some people. They've lost their mothers, their fathers, their sisters, their brothers, their friends. Everyone has died. Everyone who is even close to people in Gaza, who has family from Gaza, and you know this, how much you've suffered even. Nobody is sitting here and going, yeah, we'll just let somebody do this stupid political power play and just let them talk, as if they're helping us, but really they're leading us to our death. No one's going to accept that. Nobody, and not the supporters of Palestinians, are not going to accept that either when they understand the insidious nature of this plot. So the resistance is not going to end. It hasn't been defeated. Israel has failed to defeat the resistance in Gaza. It failed to defeat Hezbollah. It failed to defeat and overthrow Iran. It failed, and the United States, after launching its war, failed to defeat Ansarullah in Yemen. They will not win on any one of these fronts because the people have the willingness to continue resisting. And the more civilians they kill, the more slaughter that they carry out, the worse it's going to get for them in the long run. So eventually, no matter what happens, the people will continue to resist, and the Israelis, they're not going to be able to get away with this. There's many elements to this, obviously, which you can go into and talk for hours.
And that could, in fact, be the subject of our next conversation about this global intifada underway in places like Italy and Spain. I mean, we've been writing, reporting, documenting history for such a long time. I don't recall a time in the past in which such solidarity, genuine, organic solidarity, not something micromanaged by some group here and there, but really just genuine solidarity of ordinary people in so many societies, kind of taking charge of the global component of the Palestinian struggle. Robert, thank you very, very much for taking the time to talk to us, for everyone who has joined us. Thank you very much for all of your support, all of your help. Do please remember to interact with our content. It's the way of overcoming the shadow ban on our content on all social media platforms. Share, like, subscribe, leave a comment, and all the rest. Again, Robert, thank you very, very much. For more information, please visit our website, PalestineChronicle.com. Thanks for joining us.